Hello friends, Happy New Year and thank you for joining me today. I appreciate your time and interest. My first project completed for 2019, it's a Maschinen Krieger Rapoon with the stealth Night Ops themed original custom colorway and scratch built vignette display base. For those of you new to my work, welcome and I hope you like it. My name is Lincoln Wright and I worked as a studio artist for this property in Tokyo along with others for kit makers and hobby publications. I hope to help you with your journey in our craft and empower you with my tutorials. Here's an overview of the steps I'd like to cover with you in this video. Let's get started with some build notes on the final preparation of the model before starting painting. Hey guys, I'd like to take you through some of the construction tips and give you a more overall and in-depth review into putting together the construction phase of a Ma.K Rapoon. So I've made this guy pretty stock. In the big scheme of things in models, I believe it's an intermediate kit, say. It's a little bit more difficult than, say, something easy from Bandai. But it's a lot easier than, say, the more difficult ones from Hasegawa. The quality is good, but you do need to clean up quite a bit. There are quite a few seam lines on the model, and in this particular design, some of them are in quite difficult places to fix. Namely this one. There's one here that goes along there all the way down here, and it's a slight challenge to fix. I believe that's why in some of the evolution of these kits that Yokoyama-san started covering up places that required seam lines, right? So some of this, I haven't glued them on to facilitate easier painting, which you can see goes all the way down through there. I still cleaned it up just in case. You get a bit of a peek through it in places, and I wanted to make sure that it was properly cleaned up. Also, to facilitate painting, I did not glue this one in place. It's not fully fixed. It does press on nice and easily. As is the figure is loose. The studio ones are always built like that as well, and that was so that we could replace the lid. We can take photos of the lid. We can take photos of it with the lid, with the lid open like that. Or we can take photos of it. You need to pop it out, put it in the middle, and take photos of it with the lid closed. The lid, the hatch, the roof. Every single part of this model seems to have a seam line through the middle of it. You can see them through the thighs there. The feet, the lower leg, thankfully the front is covered by this shin plate, the shin armor. The arms, top and bottom, all have major seam lines running through it. You can see some of the ways that I fixed that up. I made a AFS build hacks video, and I used the Uncle Link squeeze technique, and I used that judiciously all over this model. But for the main part, that one goes in. I did some modifications to the leg pipes to make them easier to take out, to also make painting easier. Back of the legs require quite a bit of cleanup, and I replaced some of the details here on the bottom part of the leg. Quality, Link, quality. And I replaced them with custom made from epoxy putty dust covers on the bottom part here, and I drilled holes there. They're 1mm. And I attached some cables here to gives it more of a balanced look down the bottom. Balances out some of the top heaviness of it. This is also a custom. It's a aerial that I've drilled in there and placed in afterwards. Other than that, it's almost directly from the box. I kept the joints as is, and I'll be progressing with painting on this shortly. But for all of the kits that they've done, it's a really good one. I love the Rapoon. I think you can build a Raptor from the kit as well, and so it's a good one to have in the stash for building a couple of different versions. Okay, let's get on with the paint. I'm going to use the Armour Cobra on this project and the Armour One-Shot Primer, both excellent products, and I believe both were originally made by Badger Tools in the USA. Isn't it ironic that they've paired the best water-based acrylic primer currently available with the worst paint lid in the history of the hobby? So much wow. Here I am struggling to get it open, and I'm sharing this because it entertains me so much. Now if I use this primer, I'm unscrewing the lid and just pouring it in. Easy, but that's me, and you can use it as you like. I also like the Vallejo primer for water-based use. This really is a good product, and I feel it's ruining me. Just load up the old airbrush and let fly. Too easy, takes all the skill out of it. I did try and not rush too much, letting it grip the surface a little at first, but I have otherwise found it very forgiving. I just avoid going too thick too quickly. We don't want it to run or take too long to dry. It tends to be touch dry in a few minutes. Here in our summer, it's very hot, but I give it 24 hours before asking it to get to work for me and roughing it up. Most acrylic, water-based paints generally take about 24 hours to cure, and it's never a bad idea if you can afford the time to let them cure, because that helps them to achieve their full hardness, and you can put more effects over the top. Step 3, the seam line redo. Now, no matter how carefully I do my seam lines, once I prime the model, there's always a couple that sneaked past inspection. Not to fear, we can still fix them up at this stage, as the primer highlights them for us slightly. Using our old friend, Tamiya basic putty and a small flat tool, like this paint stirrer here, I can smear a small amount over the seam line and let it dry. I don't like to do it too much at once. It takes too long to dry and can remain soft in the middle. Just a little overflow to allow for a little shrinkage as the putty settles in. Just in case, I do the important parts of the model again to be double sure that they are taken care of. Just give it a few hours to dry and come back for a wet sand. I like to start with 400 grit sandpaper and then, depending on the finish, move up to 600 and maybe even 800, all wet. Sanding wet helps to keep the dust down and gives us a nice smooth finish. Once I've sanded flat and smooth, we can then reapply the primer as in the previous step and move straight on to number 4, airbrushing the base color. As soon as Armour released this set back in 2018, I spotted it on their pre-orders and had to have it. The plan was hatched. A night-top scheme based roughly on the SU-35 flanker, but customized to fit the stealth version of the Rapoon I was building. When doing color schemes for Maschinen Krieger, I came to learn that Yokoyama sensei especially likes World War II aircraft camo schemes, because he's a plane buff. Perhaps that was also part of my initial attraction. Model airplanes were also my first love as a kid. Now, I didn't have a great deal of experience with airbrushing water-based acrylics until last year, and my initial experience with them was not enjoyable, because I noobed out and did it wrong. Growing up in Japan, I was in the land of lacquers, and solvent paints make everything work. They are superior in almost every way, including being the most toxic. With my daughter at home with us over the school holidays, and it being very hot here in our summer, and working with the aircon all day, I'm a responsible dad, so solvents are just out. Enter the best part of water-based acrylics. No fumes. Just go easy with them. Being, just water, they have no good reason to stick to the primer, so it's just best to dust them lightly. Back off once you see the surface start to wet out, and then come back again and build up very thin coats. Nice dry even coats is the ticket, and then they work just great. Okay, next up we've got masking our camouflage. I'm going for a night scheme here with a pattern breaker with dark colors on top and lighter colors in the middle. Yokoyama-san used to call this a counter color, and he based it on some of the World War II patterns that were seen on British tanks. He especially liked the one on the Firefly, and I agree that did look very nifty, especially the camouflage that was down the barrel. For this task today, I'm going to test out this one, the masking putty from Armour by Ma.K. And it's my first time to use a dedicated masking putty. In the past I've used this kind of stuff, blue tack, and in my professional opinion it's exactly the same. It's a little softer. I mean, I don't know what this stuff costs. If it's a lot more expensive than blue tack, I'd probably say, hey, blue tack. If it's about the same, then I'd say, hey, masking putty. So it's been okay. It's pretty easy to work with. I'll show you a couple that I've done, but I'm basically going for this sort of shape. This works well with Maschinen Krieger parts. It's a, I don't know what to call this shape. It's the shape that we painted onto Maschinen Krieger parts. So you can see that it's slightly more, this will be the opposite. So where I've shaded, where I've masked black is where the dark blue, the night blue will stay. And then I'll be spraying the light blue around the outside of it, chipping it off a little bit. So I know some of it we'd call a Mickey Mouse pattern for World War II British vehicles, but this one I'd more call it it's like the counter color specifically for Maschinen Krieger, designed to augment and highlight the shape of the panels. So you can see it mirrors the shape of the panel, but it's slightly asymmetrical as well. I hope that makes sense. In rewatching this video back to myself, I wonder if that's going to make a lick of sense. This one again, this is where you'd see the similarity if you're familiar with the Firefly. I wanted it to kind of snake along the sensor here, so that will be light blue up under there. Now really simply, this stuff was surprising to me a little bit. I mean, cracking it open, it's quite stiff, it's quite hard at first. You think, this is rubbish. It really was my first reaction. And you pull it out and it's weird, man, because look at this. It's like the cheesiest cheese on a pizza kind of deal. But it's weird, right? Sometimes you pull it in a certain way, there it goes, and it snaps. Might be a speed thing. I'm still kind of learning how to use it. Wrap up all your cheesy bits. And it reforms together well. That was kind of cool. And the standard way is it seems to warm up. I think that could be the deal. It warms up in our fingers and it softens a great deal. And it really impressed Tabs too. As soon as I showed her this, she was like, I want to play with that. It says non-toxic, but I would need it. That's Tabs over in the background laughing. There's a couple of ways I've tried. I don't know if this will work. This is paper. I don't know if this will work. Okay, it still works. I was doing it on the cutting mat. Cutting mat worked a little better. So I was doing DJ. Yeah, see, it was silent here when I did that. I know it's going to be silent at your place when I do this too. And it won't get the laughs that I thought we were going to get in my mind. Now she's laughing at me. See, I've got an audience today. The Tabs are you reading Harry Potter now, Tabs?
No.
What you doing? Roblox?
No.
Okay, no more questions. You doing whiskey, tequila shots?
No.
Okay. The sausage one. Now I've gone with two types. I've gone with regular sausages and then irregular sausages, meaning that it was bumpy when I put it together. I want, for this pattern, I might go to about halfway. I want it aiming upwards at the end. I want it to go through a nice zig like this so that there's some congruency to the camo pattern that I'm putting on. And in the future, I might go with a more endless. Go for speed again. Yay! So it's a speed thing. If you pull it out really quick, it's liable to break. That's what she said. So I've gone with a pretty large size pattern. It's not microed, if that made sense. So it's a similar sort of pattern overall. And I'm trying to keep the same. Again, a lot of these words, this is the first time for me to both explain it in words and in English. So what Yokoyama-san and I would say together is that we would keep the same resolution of camouflage. And that probably does not make a lick of sense, does it? But the similar sort of pattern per unit of shape per area. Yeah, it sounded mathematical, didn't it? Like I know what I'm talking about. So for example, on one of these hip joints, quick, test the speed thing. And on one of these hip joints, so it's a similar sort of pattern, but this is a lot bigger, so I just enlarged it. Okay, let's come back in from the other side. Again, I want to try to get this so that it crisscrosses through the detail points to be interesting. So if by splitting up a bunch of the points, we make it a lot more interesting. There we go. And match up over here. So often on these kinds of shapes, we want the zigs of the camo to point up. That helps accentuate that. On broad positions like this, we want it to be a downward diagonal. Again, that will make it more interesting. But I do want it to be slightly more concave than convex. Yep, like that. Nice. I'll try pushing this down in between. Make sure I get a decent sort of seal in there. should work. Cool. One of the tools I found really useful working with this was the bamboo skewers. And by rolling them into place, it helped to make a better, cleaner curve, especially places where I joined the putty. It helped the putty to reseal against itself. And made it just ever so slightly more interesting. Now this is very macro patterned, and what I'm hoping will happen is that I'll be able to use and add detail at the micro level through using chipping fluid. One more piece here. I take off a piece of putty about yay big. It's about good size pea. Sausage it. Bring it back into a U, like so. Place it into the just off center and a little higher and squeeze into place. Not too bad. It's a little off in that top corner there, so I'll round that out here by running the tool through it. Make it more of an organic curve, like so. Now for the arms, I'm going for a slightly different technique. I've rolled a putty sausage to be approximately the same length. I'm going to put it on the top, as I would imagine the light to hit for our counter camouflage scheme. And pushing it down in a couple of spaces to help make it undulating. Did that make sense? So I can spread it out in a few spots like that, and here, and up here. See where it's thicker, and up here again. Boom. And that should give us a really nice counter color camouflage pattern on the top of the arms, simply by leaving that behind. It looks horrible, but hopefully it looks really cool once we do it. Today, let's go with this one. It's supposed to be a lighter chipping fluid, and I'm not after big flakes coming off, but more of a subtle effect. We can airbrush this on, but I'm going to go with a quick and easy application and paint it on with a soft brush like this. It does seem to beat up a little in places. Let's see how that comes out when we activate it. Airbrushing the second color. Alrighty, after letting the chipping fluid dry for about as long as it takes to load up the old airbrush, I've switched over to my 0.2mm from Sparmax for finer control and using Ammo's 249 light blue. I'm spraying it on. Careful not to overspray and varying how much I kind of lean it into the corners. Sometimes harder against and sometimes backing off. Light passes, 2 to 3 light coats will do the trick until we have good enough opacity and coverage. I do want it to be ever so slightly translucent, if that makes sense. Good coverage, but not too solidly opaque. I do want it to look ever so slightly weaker and gently applied as compared with the main body color. Nuances. It's always about the nuances. It's the 2 to 3% differences that we can add to our models that will really affect the outcome. They add up. Activating the chipping fluid. Now comes the spot of fun. Don't you just love pulling off masks? I'm not much of a fan of masking, putting them on, but that moment when you pull them off and it's worked perfectly. Nice, right? And now I'm also starting to think that I've nailed the color combo. They are already looking good together on their own, which is a wonderful start. I'll just quickly pull all these masks off. That worked well, and so far so good. No paint pull up nor bleeding through whatsoever. Let's choose a soft brush first and get some tap water handy. Gently brush the water on, and let's wait a couple of minutes for it to activate the chipping solution. My monkey understanding is that it's a very light acrylic, it's not paint, but just an acrylic solution that dissolves in water quickly, allowing the top coats to come away as well. I remember 12 or so years ago when people started working with and discovering uses for hairspray, and all of these type products are based on that. It could still be hairspray for all we know, right? Fine, whatever. Let's use what works. I don't want to go too hard or be too aggressive with this, just wanting a little variation with my camouflage line and pattern. See that spot there that came off first? That was still wet when I airbrushed over the top of it. I wanted to see what happened, so we can put that in the bank for the future. When we need it to come off quickly, boom, spray it over whilst it's still wet. Cool, right? The arms received a much heavier coating, so expecting more hijinks here. More scratching and maybe even some chunks slowing off. My plan is for a quite subtle and restrained theme for this suit. Quite new, but still weathered in appropriate places and with environmental effects. Okay, just after 2 minutes here with the water, and you can see it's just starting to come away from the Ma.K line. I don't know if that translates to English. I tried to mention it maybe back on the Sea Pig videos, that the demarcation line between the camouflage patterns, the Japanese guys call it the Ma.K line. And it's just a cool nickname for it. I don't think we have to worry about any kind of meaning there. And there's a bunch of ways to do it. This was another way. I did it previously on the Sea Pig with the oil paints. And here I'm doing it with chipping fluid. Just to add additional visual detail on that line between the dark and light colors here. And that's exactly what I'm after. To add detail and interest and a scale effect to the airbrushed camo pattern. Let's develop some fine scratches, but also back off once we start taking up big divots. The occasional big slow off, the big chunk off will be fine, but not too many for my finish in mind. My plan this time is to control the effect rather than have it control me. One thing I remembered whilst working here is to continually clean my brush so as not to leave the light blue paint that is coming off on the dark base. That would be a total rookie move on my part, wouldn't it? Okay, let's change brushes now. Couple of reasons. First is to change the pattern. Our eyes just know when something is too uniform, so let's stay one step ahead and change the physical tools being used. Next reason is that it's a stiffer brush and I can feel that the chipping fluid seems a tad more resistant. Or perhaps I'm just getting used to it. In any event, a change up will make this more interesting. I'm really liking this a great deal. Very light, subtle and restrained. It's funny to think this is actually my first full water-based acrylic airbrush finish, and I'm liking it a great deal. It's a whole new chapter of Link finishes being opened up. I won't go hard on it, but it's good that the monkey has one more trick up his sleeve every now and then. One more thing, let's go down from a brush to a toothpick. I really think anything sharp could be used, but with these relatively fragile surfaces as compared with say Japanese lacquer paints, the soft abrasiveness of wood seems perfect. We can use this step to do a little microchipping, and I particularly enjoy that I can be very precise and accurate with it. Similar to using a pointy brush, but with a sharp, pointy stick. Come on guys, let's confess, who doesn't also enjoy working with sharp, pointy sticks? I mean, that's the only reason I make groundwork, is that I can also play with rocks. Next, let's pick out some highlights in the upper shell areas here of the armor with the dark navy blue, and we'll do that with a combination of our main colors here. Instead of straight thinner, let's mix them with this transpirator product to try to make a translucent mix. Going with my Sparmax SP20 0.2mm plasma rifle, airbrush. The ratio I have in mind is about 1 of the bright color to 5, say, of the darker one. So with transpirator, I'll try it with, say, I want it nice and thin, about 6 drops. 4. That was 6 when I wasn't counting, so it might be a bit off. Let's put 1 drop of our bright blue. That's this guy. And let's go with 5 drops of our dark gray. And just to make sure that our paint stays very, very thin, so we can do many thin coats. Yep, I know I'm going to burn. Let's put in just, I was going to say 2, but I put in 3. Let's put in 3 drops of this one. I'm sure the transpirator also lowers the surface tension, but this one does too. And I do want it very, very thin. I'm happier to build up thinner coats and judge my progress rather than belt it on and go, oh, too dark. Let's roll with that. In the initial shot, I showed the front of the armor, but for showing the actual airbrush on there, I think it's more interesting from this angle. The Rapoon has these additional shapes on the rear that benefit from a soft highlight. I believe it's from, they were an oxygen tank that were put onto the original Fireball, upgrading the Super AFS to a space unit, and then they were more incorporated into the scheme, I think, with the Super Ball. So, in any event, I think they benefit from a soft highlight, as well as the curvature across the top of the back. Nothing too sharp, I'm not talking about modulation here, but nice thin light coats, just enough to enhance the effect of light falling on our model from above and to help with the illusion of it being full size rather than in miniature. Okay, the ID color bands. The ID bands is one of my favorite steps. It's adding, bright, interesting, contrasting ID color bands to the model. After much deliberation, I've gone with yellow, and decided to use this opportunity to test out my new Ma.K colors by Vallejo range. For more information on how and why I chose this color and the background for the overall color scheme, please watch the Nightops livestream, dated January 20th, 2019 on the Patreon site. Here I am shooting them neat, no added thinner, straight through my 0.2mm airbrush on the usual setting, around 15 psi. At first blush, I think it goes on a little bit better than the ammo paints, and even Vallejo's own Model Air range. I mean, this is yellow, so probably one of the weakest colors in the range, but it's gone on with decent opacity and chromatic values over a very dark base coats, with maybe say 6 to 8 light passes, and it's come up to a very respectable and attractive brightness. I also hand painted and improved the H decals with this to match it up with the ID bands, and found it hand brushes very similar in performance to the Vallejo game color range. By personal preference, I think I like our model color hand paints a little bit better, but hey, if you can use this same color for both the airbrush and then fixing up your decals, that's a big winner. So far so good. I am quite liking this paint range. It's now time to varnish our model and seal in these relatively soft acrylic coats. What I'm going to use this time is continue some of my experiments with this Armour by Ma.K Lucky Varnish. Do you feel lucky varnish? I certainly don't. Up until now I've been relatively tentative with this stuff. I've been pretty careful using it, and I've built it up in many thin coats, much as the rest of the paint line requires. You can see here on the left, this is how I've usually done it until now, it's a fine mist coat. You can see it actually dulls it down, so that's useful to know for subsequent steps. This time, I got a little more brave and I blasted it on. This is one heavy wet out coat and it's still fine. And really, if I was using Mr. Supercolor Clear from the can, this is the look I was after on the right. So I'm going to go back over the rest of it now and give it a good blast, a nice heavy coat. And you'll see what I mean. It works just fine. So at the moment, that is my preferred way of doing it, a heavier coat. And letting it wet out. Realistically, that's what we want for the varnish step, is because we want it to join up and seal and make a protective film over the model. In action, here it is exactly as their instructions tell us not to use their product, but the proof is in the result. Absolutely blasting it on with maybe 20% care. Sure, yes, I can put a number on that. I can quantify my exact care levels at any particular time during the scale model process. Sure, we can't go too heavy, but it's obviously wet, and there's even a little pooling in places, but it's so thin, and it dries and self-levels. So at least for 1/20th scale models, and Maschinen Krieger in this case, I think we can get away with this. In fact, I think we should do this if we wanted to get the proper result. Will it work on something smaller scale? Well, I might be a little bit more careful, or at least test it somewhere not quite so obvious. But for now, this is my SOP, my standard operating procedure. When I need to use these lucky airbrush varnishes from the Armour range. And yeah, they're not bad, but do give them 24 hours to dry and cure. Here you go, maybe 2 or 3 minutes later, it's dried down to this. Touch dry, and that's perfect for laying decals over. So my recommendation for now is different to everybody else out there, and until I find otherwise, I believe that these lucky varnishes should be sprayed on quite wet. I should try this with glossy, again at another stage, but for now I'm going to do this. What I do suspect though is that with going with the matte, that light dust coats will work better, because that's how matte varnish is supposed to work. It's supposed to produce a kind of a fractal surface that reflects light in many directions, giving us that matte finish. But for now, satin for decals, boom, this is the way to go. Okay, we've got our base colors on, we've got our decals on. I've repainted the decals to match up with the ID stripes, all that was in the previous section. Now let's add some detail work, liven up the finish a little, paint the cockpit and figure, add the night vision goggles, and get started on the weathering. Next step's coming very soon. Hope you enjoyed so far. Please let me know what you enjoyed and how you might use it yourself. Come check out and join in our Macross group build as well. Big thanks to Hobbyco and Little Robot. I do my best to buy from and support local businesses to keep our money in our communities and to empower physical events. I get to meet you guys and hang out. Fun. Please allow me a moment to thank the very special people who are our top supporters. Ivan, MB, Grant, Con, Jack, RJ, Mr. Tweets, Robert, Kelso, Kevin, David, Derek, and let's welcome Matthias, Dominic, Peter, and Nicholas. This episode was supported by you. Your support empowers me and makes all this happen. Sincerely, thank you very much, guys. More soon.